Chapter 7. An Accident. Suddenly, Mr. Zinn noticed that Nancy was not with the group. "Where is your friend?" he asked. Flustered, Bess stammered, "Oh, I guess she's just looking around." The antique dealer eyed the girls suspiciously. "Is she, by any chance, snooping for some reason?" George rushed to Nancy's defense. "My friend is a nice girl," she said haughtily. "Well, you never can tell about people," said Mr. Zinn. "I've lost some valuable articles from my shop. Mind you, I'm not saying your friend would take anything, but I have to be careful. You understand?" The girls had prolonged the conversation as much as they dared. Hoping that Nancy had had enough time to look around, they started back through the vast barn. At the same moment, they saw her hurrying toward them. "Did you find something you liked?" the dealer asked, looking at her intently. "There is one piece which interests me very much," the young detective replied. "It's that small, unusual cherry table in the corner." She led the way back and pointed out the table about which she was suspicious. "Oh, that. If you like it, buy it. The table's not so expensive," Mr. Zinn answered. "It's a copy I made of a George Washington antique. A very good copy, if I do say so myself. I am a cabinet maker as well as antique dealer." The man's statement that the table was a copy came as a great surprise to Nancy and her friends. "Where is the original piece?" George asked. "Well, actually, there are two of them," the dealer replied. "One is in River Heights. I have no idea where the matching table is, but I've searched antique shops and made many inquiries. I'd certainly like to get my hands on that piece." The girls glanced at one another. Evidently, Mr. Zinn was not aware that Mrs. Follett had owned the matching table. His eyes gleaming, the man went on. "The original tables have hidden drawers in them. It's said that one of them holds a great secret." This announcement startled the three girls. Did Mrs. Tenney know this? Could it be one of the reasons she suspected her cousin of taking the antique furniture? "That certainly is an unusual story," Bess remarked. "Please tell us more about it, Mr. Zinn." The antique dealer replied that there was really nothing more to tell. He had had a great-aunt named Mrs. Sarah Follett, who had recently passed away. She had left the contents of her home to be divided between Mr. Zinn and his cousin, Mrs. Tenney, who lived in River Heights. "As soon as the estate is settled, my cousin and I will have to decide how to apportion the furniture. It will be difficult, because we've never been very friendly. One thing we'll probably both want is the George Washington table. It's by far the most valuable piece in the collection." "Is the secret in Mrs. Follett's table?" Bess questioned him. "No, it's not. I purchased the table for my aunt from another dealer," Mr. Zinn said. "While it was here in my shop being refinished, an old friend of mine from Lancaster happened to come in. He recognized the table from a picture he had once seen and asked me if I had looked in the secret drawer. Up to that point, I had not known there was one. It was very cleverly constructed." Mr. Zinn and his friend had gone over the table thoroughly and finally had found the hidden drawer. But to their disappointment, there was nothing in it. "So whatever it is must be in the matching table," Mr. Zinn went on. "That's why I'd like to find it." Nancy decided that it was only fair to the man to tell him what she already knew. Unless he were a clever actor, he was not aware of the furniture theft. Without divulging the fact that Mrs. Tenney had asked her to investigate him, Nancy told Mr. Zinn that the three girls were from River Heights and that his cousin was a neighbor of hers. "A few days ago, she asked me to accompany her to your great-aunt's mansion," Nancy went on. "When we got there, we found the place had been burglarized." As Nancy said this, she closely watched the man. "What?" Mr. Zinn shouted. His face turned red, and his neck muscles grew taut. The furniture was stolen? As Nancy said yes, she came to the conclusion that Mr. Zinn had had no part in the disappearance of the Follett collection. He could not possibly have responded in this way to her unexpected disclosure if he were guilty. There were 2 Washington tables in the collection, she said. Only one was genuine, Mr. Zinn informed her. I made the other for Aunt Sarah. Nancy was glad to have this straightened out. She now decided to tell him about the hex sign that she had found and went on with her story. When she finished, she showed him the paper that she had found in the Follett mansion and asked if he had ever seen the symbol. I can't say that I have, the dealer replied. But on the other hand, it does look familiar. That may be because it is similar to many I have seen. Nancy inquired if he knew a Roger Holt or had ever heard of him. Well now, let me think, Mr. Zinn answered. Oh yes, now I remember. There was a fellow named Holt in my class in high school. I don't think his first name was Roger, though. But it proves, said Nancy, that people named Holt do live around this area. And Mr. Zinn nodded. The antique dealer was anxious to know what was being done to apprehend the thief and find the stolen furniture. This is a crime, he said. Nancy told him that the River Heights police were working on the case. Then she added, I wonder if the thief knows the story of the secret drawer in the Washington table. If he does, that would account for his stealing the tables Mrs. Follett had. He didn't know only one was genuine. That's right, Mr. Zinn agreed. Maybe the thief has already looked in another matching table. When he didn't find the secret, he decided maybe the table was a copy. Then, later, he thought the 2 Mrs. Follett had must be genuine. Bess sighed. This is too much for me, she said. Let's go, Nancy. It's almost lunchtime and I'm starved. Nancy laughed, but George looked at her cousin disapprovingly. Miss Marvin, she said in a severe tone, you had a big breakfast and 3 doughnuts since. You ought not to eat until tomorrow. It must be the country air, Bess defended herself. At this moment, a woman appeared in the barn shop. Mr. Zinn introduced her as his wife. She was as round as her husband and looked even plumper in her full skirt, shirred light blue apron, and ruffled collar and sleeves. But her face was dimpled and pretty, and she had a radiant smile. Mama, said the antique dealer, these girls are from River Heights. Nancy is a friend of my cousin, Ruth Tenney. Mama, she brings us dreadful news. Aunt Sarah's most valuable antiques have been stolen. Mrs. Zinn's smile faded. Stolen, she cried. That is wicked. After Nancy quickly retold the story, Mrs. Zinn said sadly, Papa, that is a great loss to you, ain't? Her husband tried to hide his distress. What one does not own is never a loss, he told her. It is a great disappointment, of course, but perhaps the furniture will be found. After a few more minutes of conversation about the loss, Mrs. Zinn said, Papa, I came to tell you that dinner is ready. Lock up and come to table. Turning to the visitors, she added, It would please us to have you break bread with us. Oh, that would be wonderful, exclaimed Bess at once, not giving Nancy and George a chance to refuse. Mrs. Zinn was pleased that her invitation had been accepted and led the girls to the farmhouse. Inside, it was far different from that of the Kreutzes. It was gay with flowers, window drapes, and quaint hooked rugs. On the table, set in the dining room, was a cloth hand-embroidered in blue and red pigeons. Quickly, Mrs. Zinn set 3 more places, and soon the 5 were eating a meal almost as sumptuous as that served at the Kreutzes. Dessert was shoe-fly pie, and at once Bess asked how it was made. "Molasses, sugar, eggs, and spices," Mrs. Zinn replied, but did not offer to give the amount of the ingredients. The girls could see that she highly prized the recipe and wanted to keep it a secret. The Zinns asked where the girls were staying. When they replied at the Croots farm, Mr. Zinn frowned. "That man is too strict," he said. "He never allowed his daughter Manda to have a good time. He never wanted her to go out to meet young men. He said he would pick her husband. That's why she ran away. You know she ran away?" The girls said yes, but that Mr. and Mrs. Croots now wanted Nancy to find their daughter and persuade her to come home. "We picked up a clue this morning that she might be working for an Amish couple who moved into this area recently," Nancy said. "Have you any idea who they might be?" "No, I haven't," said Mr. Zinn. "But if I get any leads, I'll let you know." An hour later, the girls left the farm and started back for the Croots' place. When they were about 3 miles from their destination, Bess, looking out the rear window, said nervously that she thought they were being followed by a car. "Maybe the hex on you is working again," she told Nancy. With a look of disgust, George told her cousin to stop talking nonsense. At this moment, there came the loud blast of a horn. Nancy pulled over to the side of the road. The car which Bess had worried about shot past them at high speed. The girls caught only a fleeting glimpse of the Amish driver. He wore a beard, and his black hat was pulled far down over his ears. "That man's a speed demon!" Bess cried indignantly. "Oh," George remarked, "he's probably late for some appointment." She grinned at Bess. "Anyway, he didn't follow us for long." The car sped ahead in a cloud of dust and was soon out of sight. A short while later, Nancy, keeping within the speed limit, came to a sharp curve around a low hillside. As she turned the corner, Nancy gasped in dismay. Strewn across the road, directly in the path of the convertible, were cinder blocks. There was no chance to avoid plowing into them. Quickly, Nancy pulled on the emergency brake, but not soon enough to avoid hitting several of the blocks full force. All 3 girls were thrown violently forward. Bess, seated in the middle, struck her head on the mirror and blacked out. End of chapter 7.